Hi, I'm back again. This is Jaja K. Welcome to my channel again. Halloween, in Kenya, is not a holiday, but elsewhere it is celebrated each year on October 31st and has been dogged by negative publicity, being associated with Satanism and Gothic culture. We are about to open the Halloween celebrations, and there are few facts Kenyans must know before throwing out the party and putting on the ghost costume. October 31 is the month. Halloween, as an event, seems to be growing legs in Africa, especially in Kenya, my home country. I personally noticed a few days ago that some communities in Kenya, people celebrate this festival. Initially I did not see Kenyans participating in Halloween. Well, all that has changed. What does Bible say about Halloween? Here are the best Bible verses to read as Halloween approaches. You cannot drink the cup of the Lord and the cup of demons. You cannot partake of the table of the Lord and the table of demons. Take no part in the unfruitful works of darkness, but instead expose them. Before we continue, if you are new here, welcome again, please hit the subscription button and turn the notification bell on. You might be that bit too old to go out trick or treating in Kenya on Halloween, however you can bet there will be plenty of Halloween events in for you to get involved with. There are loads of Halloween nights out in Kenya with things to do around Halloween ranging from the traditional apple bobbing Halloween games to full-on dance till you drop fancy dress Halloween parties. What's more, loads of Kenya restaurants will be getting out the cobwebs and altering their menus to add a Halloween flavor. As the days get shorter and the nights get longer, a Halloween party in Kenya is just what the doctors ordered to get through those post-summer blues. Halloween is a holiday celebrated each year on October 31st, and Halloween 2021 will occur on Sunday, October 31st. The tradition originated with the ancient Celtic festival of Samhain, when people would light bonfires and wear costumes to ward off ghosts. In the 8th century, Pope Gregory III designated November 1 as a time to honor All Saints. Soon, All Saints' Day incorporated some of the traditions of Samhain. The evening before was known as All Hallows' Eve, and later Halloween. Over time, Halloween evolved into a day of activities like trick-or-treating, carving jack-o'-lanterns, festive gatherings, donning costumes and eating treats. Ancient origins of Halloween. Halloween's origins date back to the ancient Celtic festival of Samhain, pronounced Samhain. The Celts, who lived 2,000 years ago, mostly in the area that is now Ireland, the United Kingdom and northern France, celebrated their new year on November 1st. This day marked the end of summer and the harvest and the beginning of the dark, cold winter, a time of year that was often associated with human death. Celts believed that on the night before the new year, the boundary between the worlds of the living and the dead became blurred. On the night of October 31 they celebrated Samhain, when it was believed that the ghosts of the dead returned to earth. In addition to causing trouble and damaging crops, Celts thought that the presence of the otherworldly spirits made it easier for the Druids, or Celtic priests, to make predictions about the future. For a people entirely dependent on the volatile natural world, these prophecies were an important source of comfort during the long, dark winter. To commemorate the Halloween parties, Druids built huge sacred bonfires in the 1930s. Halloween had become a secular but community-centered holiday, with parades and town-wide Halloween parties as the featured entertainment. Despite the best efforts of many schools and communities, vandalism began to plague some celebrations in many communities during this time. By the 1950s, town leaders had successfully limited vandalism and Halloween had evolved into a holiday directed mainly at the young. Due to the high numbers of young children during the 50s baby boom, parties moved from town civic centers into the classroom or home, where they could be more easily accommodated. Between 1920 and 1950, the centuries-old practice of trick-or-treating was also revived. Trick-or-treating was a relatively inexpensive way for an entire community to share the Halloween celebration. In theory, families could also prevent tricks being played on them by providing the neighborhood children with small treats. Thus, a new American tradition was born, and it has continued to grow. Today, Americans spend an estimated $6 billion annually on Halloween, making it the country's second-largest commercial holiday after Christmas. Halloween movies. Speaking of commercial success, scary Halloween movies have a long history of being box office hits. Classic Halloween movies include the Halloween franchise, based on the 1978 original film directed by John Carpenter and starring Donald Pleasence, Nick Castle, Jamie Lee Curtis and Tony Moran. In Halloween, a young boy named Michael Myers murders his 17-year-old sister and is committed to jail, only to escape as a teen on Halloween night and seek out his old home and a new target. A direct sequel to the original Halloween was released in 2018, starring Jamie Lee Curtis and Nick Castle. A sequel to that, Halloween Kills, the 12th film in the Halloween franchise overall, was released in 2021. Considered a classic horror film down to its spooky soundtrack, Halloween inspired other iconic slasher films like Scream, Nightmare on Elm Street and Friday the 13th. More family-friendly Halloween movies include Hocus Pocus, The Nightmare Before Christmas, Beetlejuice and It's the Great Pumpkin, Charlie Brown. New Year's, Valentine's Day, Halloween, Easter she says. There were costumes for many occasions, and dress balls and costume masquerades were much more popular than they are now. Halloween costumes back then were more specifically geared toward spooky themes as opposed to current events and mostly homemade. The goal wasn't necessarily to dress up as a particular creature or character, but rather to conceal identity in a spooky way that evoked themes like ghosts, witches, pumpkins, black cats and the moon. There would be moon symbols, darker fabrics for some costumes, anything that you could get and make that would kind of suggest or replicate something dark and otherworldly she says. Costumes in the early 20th century and beyond also sometimes sought to portray other cultures and races in a way that is now recognized to be insensitive and often racist. Americans culturally appropriated turbans and other symbols of the Far East, reflecting contemporary fascination with Egypt as an exotic place. White Americans wore blackface to portray African Americans in a tradition that's steeped in a history of racism and that continues today. As Halloween became more about entertaining children and keeping children occupied, the costumes became things that children enjoyed, Bannatyne says. This included characters from popular radio shows, comics and movies like Mickey and Minnie Mouse. These costumes represented things that children might have seen and enjoyed, rather than an abstract expression of night. Big department store companies like Sears started selling box costumes aimed at children, but these were considered expensive luxuries during the Great Depression. Most families continued to make their own Halloween outfits using costume patterns, even for Mickey and Minnie. In the 1950s, mass-produced box costumes became more affordable, so more kids began to use them to dress up as princesses, mummies, clowns or more specific characters like Batman and Frankenstein's monster. There were cowboy costumes, and there were also the type of Indian costumes that Native Americans found offensive and still find offensive. The 1970s saw some more adult changes to Halloween costumes. This is the period when Americans began wearing presidential masks, particularly the most famous one of all, Richard Nixon's. The first newspaper report of a presidential mask was in 1969, when a protester wore a Nixon mask to an anti-war march the day before Nixon's inauguration. Later that year, at a White House Halloween party thrown by Nixon's daughter Tricia, a female guest showed up wearing a mask of former President Lyndon B. Johnson. After the Watergate scandal, it was the Nixon mask that became the more popular Halloween costume. The scandal caused Americans to become more cynical about their government, and as new politicians took office or ran for president, stores began to sell masks of those politicians' faces too. Even so, the Nixon mask continued to be one of the most popular presidential masks long after he was gone. Over the next few decades, a variety of other costume trends related to pop culture emerged. Halloween costumes in the 1970s and 80s became more gruesome with the rise of slasher horror movies. These movies also cemented Michael Myers and Jason Voorhees masks as classic horror costumes. Major fantasy and sci-fi movies had a big influence, too. Fans dressed up as C-3PO, Darth Vader and Princess Leia from Star Wars, and kids particularly liked dressing up as the titular alien in E.T. Sexy costumes for women were common from the 1960s onward, and in the 1990s, sexy versions of store-bought costumes became an established commercial product. Manufacturers also sold costumes based on highly charged current events. In 1995, the year of the O.J. Simpson trial, costume shops sold masks of both Simpson and the presiding Judge Ito. In a less controversial trend, costume companies have also marketed costumes inspired by TV shows. For example, in 2019, new Golden Girls costumes for Blanche, Dorothy, Rose and Sophia became available, although it's probably easier and definitely cheaper to put together a DE version with mom's old clothes. 1910 seconds Halloween costumes were geared towards spooky themes and were mostly homemade. Here women dressed as witches line up for a Halloween portrait. 1920s The goal of early costumes wasn't to dress like a particular creature or character, but rather to conceal one's identity in a spooky way that evoked themes like ghosts, witches, black cats or the moon. Since teenage pranksters were known to wreak havoc on Halloween night, starting around the Great Depression, adults started organizing neighborhood activities like trick-or-treating, haunted houses and costume parties to keep young people from making trouble.